Hey guys, tonight we slip through a pair of towering gates carved with falcons, lotus blossoms, and scenes of kings smiting their enemies. You're not here as a tourist. No, tonight you're stepping into Pharaoh's palace at dawn, chosen, or perhaps forced, into a life that almost no one outside these walls will ever understand. The air smells of cool stone and incense, and guards with shaved heads and gleaming spears stare down as you pass. You probably won't survive this, let's be honest. A world of court politics, hidden rivalries, and the weight of one man's absolute power. Even Netflix would warn you to skip ahead, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to see where and when everyone is listening in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The palace is alive already, even in the gray light of dawn. Servants carry baskets of bread still warm from the ovens, others sweep sand off polished limestone floors, and scribes shuffle tablets and papyrus rolls for the day's accounts. For you, though, the day begins not in a kitchen or courtyard but in the guarded precinct of Pharaoh's harem. Mainstream fact: the harem of ancient Egypt wasn't just a cluster of women, it was an institution. Housing wives, concubines, children, servants, guards, and administrators, all orbiting the ruler. Historians still argue whether it was mainly a domestic household or a political powerhouse disguised as one, but its influence was undeniable. You're led past carved wooden doors into a world separated from the clamor of the city. The hallways are cool, shadows stretching across painted walls of lotus ponds and hunting scenes. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists discovered small gaming boards, like ancient versions of checkers, tucked into corners of harem compounds, suggesting that women and servants pass time in surprisingly relatable ways. Joke 1 practically falls out of your mouth: great, so while my fate hangs on Pharaoh's whims, I can at least crush someone in a round of Senate. The atmosphere is both luxurious and tense. Cushions stuffed with goose down line the floors, and musicians pluck harps in practice, but whispers dart around like quick fish. You're new here, and every pair of kohl-lined eyes sizes you up. Some concubines smile thinly, others look away. Mainstream fact again: Egyptian harems included not just noble-born women but also captives from foreign lands, gifts from powerful allies, or daughters of local elites seeking influence. Historians still argue whether these women had much agency, or whether they were pawns in dynastic games. As the sun edges up, gilding the Nile beyond the walls, the harem awakens into its daily rhythm. You're shown to your quarters, small but scented with lotus oil, a carved bed inlaid with ebony, a polished copper mirror waiting on a stand. Quirky tidbit again: Egyptians prized mirrors so much that they were often buried with them, believing beauty was eternal. You tilt your face, joke 2 slipping out: fantastic, my soul's eternal baggage now includes checking if my eyeliner smudged. The guards stationed outside are reminders that this world is golden but locked. You're inside a cage that glitters. Privilege means comfort, but also confinement. The walls rise high, the gates are barred, and your life has become both dream and trap. Mainstream fact once more: harem complexes often had their own gardens, lakes, and even workshops, making them like self-contained cities. Historians still argue whether the women felt imprisoned or empowered by access to such resources, but either way, the gates rarely opened for them. By midday, you're already learning the unspoken rules: bow lower than the favored wives, smile without showing too much eagerness, and never, ever let the gossipers twist your words. Joke 3 escapes under your breath: perfect, I've just joined history's most stressful book club. The day in Pharaoh's house has begun, and your new life, as ornament, as pawn, as possible power behind the scenes, has only just unfolded. The first full morning in the harem feels less like waking up and more like being staged for a performance you never auditioned for. Before you can eat, before you can even stretch properly, attendants usher you into a chamber filled with basins of cool water and trays of polished alabaster jars. This is where the transformation begins. Silks, oils, and kohl turn you from a nervous girl into one of Pharaoh's treasures. Mainstream fact: Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness and ritual bathing, especially those close to the royal household. Daily washing in scented water was both hygienic and spiritual. Historians still argue whether these routines were primarily about health or about aligning with ideals of divine purity. But either way, missing your bath was not an option. Servants pour water over your arms, rub your skin with natron salts, and pat you dry with linen finer than anything you've ever touched. Quirky tidbit: natron, the same mineral used in mummification, was also a staple in cleansing rituals, so yes, you're technically exfoliating with the same stuff used to preserve corpses. Joke 1 slips out: wonderful. I'm alive, but my skincare routine is straight from the embalming table. Next comes the perfume. Oils of lotus, frankincense, and myrrh are massaged into your hair and skin until you glisten like a polished statue. The attendants work silently, but their eyes dart, judging whether you flinch or relax under their touch. Mainstream fact again: wealthier Egyptians invested fortunes in perfume, and entire expeditions were launched to secure frankincense trees. Historians still argue whether these imports were driven more by ritual needs or by the desire to display luxury, but either way, you smell like global trade. Then the kohl. A small ivory stick dips into a pot of black powder made from galena, traced carefully around your eyes. It sharpens your gaze into something feline and mysterious. Quirky tidbit again: Egyptians believed kohl not only beautified but also protected against eye infections and warded off evil spirits. You blink at your reflection in a copper mirror, joke 2 drifting out: great, now I'm both fashionable and ghost-proof. 2-for-1 deal. Silks are draped across your body, linen dyed with rare plant pigments, stitched with golden threads. Jewelry is added: broad collars of faience beads, bangles that clink softly, anklets that flash with each step. Mainstream fact once more: jewelry wasn't just decoration but carried amuletic significance. Thought to protect wearers and signal status. Historians still argue whether concubines received these luxuries as gifts of genuine favor or as standardized symbols of their role, but either way, you've become part of the display. When the attendants finally step back, the person in the mirror barely looks like you anymore. You're sculpted, perfumed, lined in black and gold, a living offering to Pharaoh's eyes. The air smells of lotus oil and powdered resin, cloying but oddly reassuring. Joke 3 escapes in a whisper: honestly, if I sneeze right now, I'll set back an hour of work and a small fortune in imported myrrh. The day stretches ahead, and while the silk may shimmer, you can already feel the weight of expectation pressing heavier than the gold around your neck. By the time the morning ritual of perfumes and silks is done, you're not just dressed, you're wrapped in an invisible web of hierarchy. Every step you take through the corridors reminds you of it, because the harem is less a home and more a pyramid of power, with Pharaoh perched smugly at the invisible top and everyone else scrambling for footing on the steps below. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptian harems were strictly organized, with the great royal wife at the pinnacle, below her lesser wives, then concubines, attendants, and countless servants. Some were politically influential noblewomen, others were foreign-born captives, and many children of Pharaoh himself grew up within these walls. Historians still argue whether the harem was more a household or a political engine, but either way, you've walked into the machinery, you notice it immediately. At breakfast, women sit in neat clusters that look suspiciously like cliques from a modern high school. The senior wives recline near shaded colonnades, surrounded by servants who fan them with palm leaves. The concubines closest to Pharaoh perch nearby, careful not to laugh too loudly or eat too quickly. Then there's the rest, new arrivals like you, eyeing crumbs and waiting for scraps of attention. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists found evidence that some harems even had their own law courts and administrative offices. Meaning disputes weren't just personal, they were bureaucratic. Imagine filing official paperwork because someone borrowed your best wig without asking. Joke 1 escapes, honestly, if they invent HR next, I'm quitting. The great royal wife is the sun everyone orbits. She glides through with her head high, servants trailing like the tail of a comet, her jewelry louder than her footsteps. She barely glances at you, but her silence is heavier than words. Mainstream fact again, the great royal wife often held political and religious duties, including ceremonial roles alongside Pharaoh, making her a formidable rival to anyone seeking influence. Historians still argue whether concubines could ever surpass her in power, but the rare ones who did usually left ruins or temples as evidence. Back in your quarters, you overhear whispers. One concubine hisses that another has been favored too often, while another brags about a new necklace Pharaoh supposedly gave her. Quirky tidbit again, gossip wasn't just pastime, it was survival currency. A well-placed rumor could elevate you or doom you. Joke 2 slips out as you shuffle past, perfect. I'm trapped in the world's earliest reality TV show, minus the cameras, plus the risk of execution. As the day wears on, you start to sense the invisible lines, who bows to whom, who sits where, who speaks first. It's like learning the choreography of a dance where one wrong step could cost you dearly. Servants scurry to carry messages, eyes cast down, but everyone knows they listen more than they serve. Mainstream fact once more, written records confirm that conspiracies did brew inside harems, with rival factions plotting to elevate their sons as heirs. Historians still argue whether the infamous harem conspiracy against Pharaoh Ramesses III was orchestrated mainly by women or by officials outside the walls. But the whispers alone prove how dangerous these halls could be. By evening, you feel exhausted not from work, but from the effort of navigating a social minefield. The silks are heavy, the smiles are heavier, and the realization settles in, you're not just competing for favor, you're surviving it. Joke 3 leaves your lips as you sink onto your bed. At this point, I'd rather fight a crocodile in the Nile, it seems simpler than palace politics. The next morning, you learn that beauty and gossip alone won't keep you afloat here. The harem isn't just a resting place, it's a school, a performance hall, and a stage where everyone is expected to rehearse endlessly, preparing for the one moment Pharaoh's eyes might linger on them. You're quickly ushered into a long, airy chamber where teachers wait with instruments, scrolls, and sharp eyes that measure every gesture you make. Mainstream fact, women in Egyptian royal households were often trained in music, dance, and poetry, as these were considered essential tools of refinement and charm. Scenes in tomb paintings show female musicians and dancers entertaining Pharaoh or the gods themselves. Historians still argue whether concubines performed mainly for the ruler's pleasure or if they also took part in wider temple and festival ceremonies, but their training was rigorous either way. You sit cross-legged on a mat as a teacher hands you a harp with strings that gleam like spun gold. She plucks a melody, and you try to mimic it, fingers clumsy at first. Quirky tidbit, Egyptians loved the sound of the sistrum, a rattling instrument shaped like a horseshoe, that was said to soothe both humans and gods. When someone shakes one nearby, its jingling fills the room, oddly calming. Joke 1 escapes under your breath, honestly, it's just a divine maraca, but sure, let's say the gods groove to it. Later, you're guided into a circle of dancers. Bare feet slap softly against polished stone, hips sway in rhythm, arms sweep like reeds in the Nile breeze. Every movement is slow, deliberate, designed to hypnotize. You stumble once, catching the glare of a senior concubine who clearly enjoys watching you fail. Mainstream fact again, in Egyptian culture, dance wasn't only entertainment, it carried religious undertones, sometimes used in rituals of fertility and rebirth. Historians still argue whether harem dance lessons were mostly symbolic or directly tied to spiritual belief, but either way, the moves are carved into muscle memory, the lessons don't end with art. You're also taught how to walk, yes, how to walk, so that each step seems graceful, deliberate, a living sculpture. Your voice is trained in soft recitation of poetry, verses praising the Nile, Pharaoh's might, the beauty of lotus blossoms. Quirky tidbit again, some fragments of ancient Egyptian love poetry survive, filled with surprisingly direct affection. My heart flutters when I see you isn't far from what you might hear in a pop song today. You recite lines, and joke 2 slips, great. I'm basically an ancient mixtape. Hours pass in repetition. Play, recite, sway, bow. It's exhausting, but the instructors never soften. Every mistake earns a correction, every success only raises the bar higher. You realize this is not leisure, it's survival training in disguise. Mainstream fact once more, courtly women were expected to embody ideals of harmony and beauty, reflecting the Egyptian belief in ma'at, balance, order, and cosmic stability. Historians still argue whether women themselves believed in this cosmic role, or whether it was just imposed rhetoric, but the pressure was real. By evening, your arms ache from the harp, your legs from dancing, your throat from poetry. You collapse onto a cushion, mind spinning with rhythms and words. Joke 3 slips out as you groan. At this point, Pharaoh better give me a standing ovation if I ever get picked. I've basically done a Broadway audition. By now you've learned to bow at the right angle, pluck a harp without snapping the strings, and keep your smile steady even when rivals hiss. But then comes another lesson, what it means to eat like royalty. Meals in the harem are not just about food, they're about display, about hierarchy, about knowing when to reach for figs and when to politely pretend you're not starving. Mainstream fact, Egyptian elites enjoyed diets far richer than the common folk, with bread, beer, dates, figs, honey, roasted meats, and fish from the Nile. Tomb paintings depict banquets piled with delicacies, though much of daily fare still centered on staples like bread and beer. Historians still argue whether concubines had constant access to this luxury or whether these lavish spreads were reserved for special occasions. But the harems certainly ate better than the fields outside. You're led into a hall where low tables are set with baskets of bread shaped like little pyramids, bowls of lentils, dishes of roasted duck, and platters of grapes and pomegranates. The scent of honey and roasted meat is so thick it makes your stomach growl. Quirky tidbit, Egyptians sweetened everything with honey, not just pastries, but sometimes even wine, so sweet tooth wasn't just a phrase, it was practically a national identity. You dip a piece of bread into honey and mutter joke 1, honestly, dentists must have been the real winners in ancient Egypt. The seating arrangement says as much as the menu. Favored wives sit close to the head of the table, eating slowly, delicately, while lesser concubines hover near the back. Servants circulate, pouring beer into tall ceramic jars, but they never meet your eyes. Mainstream fact again, beer was the universal drink, thick, cloudy, and filling. Historians still argue whether elite beer was brewed differently from the everyday version, but it was considered safer than water and often more nutritious. You sip cautiously and nearly choke, the beer is tangy, almost porridge-like. Quirky tidbit again, some recipes used dates to add flavor, so what you're drinking could almost pass for a sour smoothie. Joke 2 slips out as you cough, so much for craft brewing, I'd trade this for a modern soda in a heartbeat. The feast isn't just indulgence. It's a test. Women glance at one another, measuring how much you eat, whether you lick your fingers, whether you show restraint. To be too greedy is shameful, to eat too little, suspicious. The food is delicious, yes, but also a weapon in the endless competition of appearances. Mainstream fact once more, Egyptian art often depicts banquets as idealized moments of abundance, with participants feasting, drinking, and playing music. Historians still argue whether these depictions reflected reality or were aspirational, but for you, the pressure is very real. As the meal ends, musicians strike up on lutes and flutes, filling the hall with gentle melodies. Servants clear the dishes, leaving only the lingering scent of honey and roasted duck. You recline on cushions, trying to ignore the ache in your stomach from holding back. Joke 3 slips out as you lean to whisper, if Pharaoh doesn't notice me soon, I'll just become famous for being the only concubine to starve at a banquet. The torches flicker low, and you realize that in this world, even a bowl of lentils comes wrapped in politics. The feasting, the lessons, the endless gossip, all of it is really about one thing: waiting for Pharaoh's presence. You feel it in the way the hall hushes when his name is mentioned, or how a concubine's smile can shift overnight if she has been summoned to his chambers. Tonight, it's your turn to find out what it feels like when the living god of Egypt turns his gaze toward you. Mainstream fact: Pharaoh wasn't just a ruler but also seen as divine, the earthly embodiment of Horus and intermediary with the gods. Being chosen by him was more than personal, it was symbolic, even spiritual. Historians still argue whether concubines were selected purely for beauty, political alliance, or ritual necessity, but every encounter was steeped in layers of meaning. You're bathed again, this time with more ceremony, lotus petals floating on the water, attendants whispering prayers to Hathor, goddess of love and joy. Quirky tidbit: Egyptians believed certain scents, like blue lotus, could induce feelings of relaxation and even mild euphoria. You breathe deeply and mutter joke 1, at least if this goes badly, I'll be too high on lotus fumes to notice. You're dressed in linen so fine it's nearly transparent, adorned with gold bangles that clink at your wrists. A servant dusts your hair with crushed malachite, shimmering under torchlight. Then the procession begins, slow, deliberate steps through torchlit corridors until you reach the grand audience chamber. Columns rise like stone trees, their capitals painted in blues and greens, shadows dancing along carved hieroglyphs of victories and offerings. Pharaoh sits on a throne of gold and ebony, a crook and flail crossed over his chest, his eyes outlined in thick kohl. The air seems heavier in his presence, as though everyone breathes more cautiously. Mainstream fact again: court ceremonies were designed to reinforce Pharaoh's godlike authority, often staging encounters as sacred rituals rather than private moments. Historians still argue whether concubines saw these encounters as empowering or intimidating, but for you, intimidation wins hands down. You bow so low your forehead almost touches the floor. When you rise, Pharaoh's gaze lingers, not long, but long enough for the hall to notice. Servants murmur, scribes jot notes, and other concubines' eyes burn holes into your back. Quirky tidbit again: ancient Egyptians used wax tablets to jot down quick records. Somewhere, a scribe may have casually scribbled, concubine number whatever caught Pharaoh's attention tonight. Joke 2 escapes in your head: fantastic. I'm officially meeting Goldust in someone's day planner. The ceremony feels endless. Musicians play, incense clouds the chamber, and attendants hover. Yet the real moment is brief: a glance, a nod, perhaps a word. You're ushered closer, seated at the edge of a dais, allowed to pour wine into Pharaoh's cup. Your hands tremble, but the cup doesn't spill, and that alone feels like victory. Mainstream fact once more: rituals of service, like pouring drinks or presenting food, were acts of devotion and loyalty as much as practical duties. Historians still argue whether such small gestures had genuine weight or were mere theatrics, but in your pounding heart, it feels monumental. Later, back in your chamber, you replay the encounter endlessly. Did he smile? Did he frown? Did he even notice you beyond the cup of wine? Joke 3 slips out as you collapse onto your bed: honestly, I think I just survived the most stressful dinner service in history. The night is quiet, but your pulse isn't. Pharaoh's gaze may have passed over you once, but here, a single glance can change everything. The first time you are ushered past the towering columns into Pharaoh's private quarters, you realize that luxury and confinement can exist in the same breath. The harem had been silken cages, yes, but these chambers feel like another universe: quieter, grander, and more unsettling. Mainstream fact: Pharaoh's private rooms were decorated with lavish furniture, beds with carved lion legs, gilded chairs, alabaster jars of perfume, and painted ceilings that mimicked the starry sky. These spaces were not only for rest but for reinforcing the image of Pharaoh as master of earth and cosmos. Historians still argue whether concubines spent long stretches in these quarters or only fleeting ceremonial moments, but the atmosphere of exclusivity was palpable. Servants moved like shadows, refilling oil lamps and adjusting linen curtains. They vanish before your eyes meet theirs. The silence is almost too perfect, broken only by the crackle of torches. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists uncovered beds strung with woven cords, acting like primitive spring mattresses. You sit gingerly on one and mutter joke one, so Pharaoh's sleeping on history's first IKEA hack, cords and wood instead of Allen keys. The chamber smells of myrrh, resin, and the faint metallic tang of gold. Every surface gleams: golden cups, polished ebony chests, ivory combs laid neatly on trays. Yet the room feels oddly sterile, like a stage set where even dust is forbidden. Mainstream fact again: many pharaohs believed their chambers were sacred spaces, protected by household gods, their decoration invoking eternal order. Historians still argue whether this privacy offered Pharaoh any actual intimacy, or if even here, he was always on display. When you're permitted to speak, your words are soft, rehearsed, almost scripted. You've been trained for this, yet your voice trembles anyway. You pour wine, you sing softly, you recite lines of poetry drilled into your memory. Pharaoh listens, or at least, he doesn't interrupt. Quirky tidbit again: some surviving Egyptian love songs describe women comparing their voices to birds or rivers, meant to soothe and entice. You whisper one, joke two slipping in your head: honestly, if he doesn't like my rendition, I'll just blame the harpist. The hours pass in a haze of ritualized intimacy, gestures of devotion, small performances of charm. You are both present and absent, treasured and replaceable. An ornament placed carefully among gold. Mainstream fact once more: scholars know that many concubines bore children, becoming mothers of princes and princesses, their status rising accordingly. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh genuinely formed attachments to particular women, or whether lineage was the true measure of importance. When you are dismissed, the corridor outside feels both relief and emptiness. You've seen Pharaoh's inner sanctum, touched his world of guarded silence, yet you return to your own quarters more uncertain than before. Joke 3 whispers as you crawl into bed: so, basically, I'm living in history's fanciest Airbnb, except I can't check out. The oil lamps gutter low, and the walls close in. Privilege here is gilded, yes, but confinement never stops pressing at the edges. After the silken silence of Pharaoh's chambers, you realize the true noise of the harem isn't music or footsteps, it's gossip. Secrets swirl here like the desert wind, invisible yet powerful, carrying whispers that can lift a woman into favor or bury her in disgrace. If bread is the staff of life outside, rumor is the currency within. Mainstream fact: Egyptian harems were infamous for intrigue, with the most famous being the harem conspiracy against Pharaoh Ramesses III in the 12th century BCE. Court documents record plots by wives and concubines to assassinate him and place another son on the throne. Historians still argue whether these conspiracies were mainly driven by women's ambitions or manipulated by ambitious officials. But the harem clearly had teeth behind its silks. You hear it everywhere: at the baths, while servants pour water, in the gardens, between bites of figs, at night, whispered through thin walls. One concubine brags that she's caught Pharaoh's eye, another hisses that she's merely repeating hearsay. Quirky tidbit: some fragments of papyrus suggest servants doubled as spies, reporting back on women's chatter. Imagine trying to whisper about your rival while your masseuse files a secret memo. Joke 1 bubbles up: fantastic, I'm living in a soap opera where even the soap might be listening. The trick, you soon learn, isn't to avoid gossip but to wield it carefully. Drop a word here, a sigh there, let someone else connect the dots. A rumor launched carelessly can rebound disastrously. Mainstream fact again: political stability depended on succession, and women in the harem often maneuvered to elevate their sons as heirs. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh himself encouraged these rivalries to maintain control, or whether they spun out of even his reach. One afternoon, you catch a group leaning close, whispering about a new gift Pharaoh supposedly bestowed. The story changes with each retelling. Was it a necklace, a villa, a promise? By evening, no one remembers what's true, only that one concubine is suspiciously lucky. Quirky tidbit again, Egyptian storytellers loved exaggeration, and it's entirely possible a simple jar of honey could be inflated into a palace by the time gossip did its rounds. You roll your eyes, joke 2 slipping out, great, so we're basically running on ancient tabloid journalism. But gossip isn't all venom. Sometimes it's survival. A whispered warning might save you from a rival's trap, or a discreet tip about Pharaoh's mood might let you avoid disaster. Mainstream fact once more, surviving papyri show that accusations, even false ones, could lead to trials, punishment, or exile. Historians still argue whether women in harems lived in constant fear or whether these trials were rare exceptions, but either way, you keep your mouth and ears sharp. By nightfall, as you curl beneath your linen sheets, you realize you've spent the whole day talking and listening without ever saying what you truly think. Joke 3 drifts into your thoughts. Honestly, it's less a harem and more a 24/7 rumor factory, minus the coffee breaks. Sleep comes, but your mind races. Tomorrow's whispers may crown you, or crush you. If gossip is the harem's bloodstream, faith is its heartbeat. You wake to find a servant laying amulets at the foot of your bed, small charms shaped like ankhs, eyes of Horus, and scarabs. They're not just jewelry, they're lifelines, silent promises that unseen powers might protect you from rivals and sickness. Mainstream fact, ancient Egyptians believed deeply in protective amulets and rituals, linking them to gods like Hathor for love, Tauret for childbirth, and Bes for household protection. Historians still argue whether these items were primarily religious or psychological comforts, but to the women in the harem, they were essential armor. Before lessons, you and others kneel in a chapel-like chamber. Its walls painted with lotus ponds and starry skies. Priests chant hymns to Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy, asking her to keep the harem safe. Quirky tidbit, some concubines were said to wear fish-shaped amulets as symbols of fertility, since fish reproduced in vast numbers. You finger one nervously, muttering joke 1, fantastic, my eternal destiny is now tied to a tilapia. The rituals spill into daily life. Before meals, you touch bread to your lips, whispering thanks to Osiris for life-giving grain. Before stepping into a bath, you murmur to Tauret, hoping her hippo's bulk scares away bad luck. Mainstream fact again, magical incantations were often recited alongside everyday acts, blending the sacred into the mundane. Historians still argue whether women truly believed every charm worked, or whether it was simply tradition, but in a world where enemies might poison your food, every safeguard felt justified. Some evenings, the harem gathers for bigger ceremonies. Musicians play the sistrum, rattling it to drive away evil spirits, while dancers move in circles under torchlight. Quirky tidbit again, the rattling sistrum was so linked to divine joy that even statues of Hathor were sometimes carved holding one. You sway clumsily, joke 2 escaping. Honestly, it feels less like a ritual and more like we're auditioning for the god's favorite band. Amulets pile up over time. Scarabs tucked into beds, lotus charms sewn into linen, lapis beads strung around wrists. You wear so many talismans it's a wonder you don't jingle when you walk. Mainstream fact once more, some amulets were even inscribed with personalized spells, turning them into miniature contracts with the divine. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh's household had access to stronger or exclusive magic. But you can't help suspecting the gods might play favorites here too. At night, as the lamps flicker, you lie under your charms, listening to rivals whisper through the walls. Fear hovers, but so does hope. Joke 3 drifts through your thoughts, if half these spells actually work, I should wake up tomorrow as Queen of Egypt. Sleep settles heavy, weighed down by amulets and prayers, and the knowledge that in this gilded cage, even gods are recruited as bodyguards. Just when you think you've grown used to the rituals of perfumes and prayers, the door opens one morning to reveal a physician and his attendants, arms full of jars and bundles of herbs. Health in the harem is not just a private concern, it's a matter of dynastic survival. If concubines fall ill, Pharaoh's household trembles. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptian medicine was highly developed for its time, blending practical remedies with magical incantations. Papyrus scrolls like the Eber's papyrus detail hundreds of treatments, from wound care to fertility tonics. Historians still argue whether physicians were genuine scientists or priests cloaked in ritual, but their reputation stretched from Nile to desert. The physician lays out tools, copper scalpels, bronze tweezers, and reed pens for recording observations. He inspects you with a solemn expression, muttering words you can't quite catch. Quirky tidbit: Egyptians sometimes diagnosed illness by listening to a patient's pulse, believing it revealed the state of different body parts, an early forerunner of modern diagnostics. You extend your wrist, joke one slipping out: if he says my liver is angry again, I'm demanding a refund. He prescribes a mixture of honey, dates, and herbs to strengthen the womb. The concoction is sticky, sweet, and vaguely suspicious. Mainstream fact again: honey was a go-to ingredient in Egyptian medicine, prized for its antibacterial properties. Historians still argue whether these fertility tonics were effective or purely symbolic, but women consumed them faithfully. In another corner, an attendant grinds malachite into powder, mixing it with oil to apply around the eyes. It's supposed to ward off infections, but also doubles as eyeliner. Quirky tidbit again: modern studies suggest the lead compounds in coal may have stimulated the immune system slightly, so vanity may have carried hidden benefits. You blink at the heavy black lines and mutter joke 2, great, so my smoky eye is technically a vaccine. The visit stretches on: ointments for the skin, charms against headaches, incantations whispered as incense curls. The line between science and magic blurs constantly. Mainstream fact once more: physicians often worked alongside priests, prescribing both remedies and rituals. Historians still argue whether patients believed more in the herbs or the prayers, but in a palace where everything is symbolic, it hardly matters. By evening, your chambers reek of garlic, honey, and incense. You lie on your bed, belly full of tonics, skin slick with oils, charms tied around your wrists. The treatments may work, or may not, but they serve another purpose: reassurance, control, the illusion of safety. Joke 3 escapes softly: at this rate, I'll either live forever or just smell like a walking salad bar. The lamps dim, and the air is heavy with medicine and muttered spells. In the harem, even health is a performance staged for gods, rivals, and the ruler who decides your fate. Days blur into routines of lessons, banquets, whispers, and rituals, but then there are stretches where absolutely nothing happens. No summons, no intrigue, no ceremonies. Just silence, punctuated by the slow drip of water into garden basins and the shuffle of servants sweeping sand. Boredom, you realize, might be the most dangerous luxury of all. Mainstream fact: concubines often lived secluded lives inside harem complexes, with limited freedom to leave. While surrounded by luxury, they also faced long periods of idleness. Historians still argue whether these women experienced their days as leisure or confinement, but the psychological weight of waiting must have been immense. You find yourself sewing embroidery, stitching lotus patterns into linen until your fingers ache. The cloth piles up, beautiful but useless. Quirky tidbit: fragments of embroidered textiles from harem sites suggest women passed hours practicing needlework that sometimes ended up buried with them. You glance at your growing pile, joke 1 slipping out: fantastic, my legacy might just be the world's fanciest napkin. Other concubines gather in small groups to tell stories. Tales of gods tricking one another, pharaohs smiting enemies, or even whispered memories of villages far away. Some are funny, others tinged with homesickness. Mainstream fact again, storytelling was a vital part of Egyptian culture, and tales like the shipwrecked sailor or the tale of two brothers have survived on papyrus for millennia. Historians still argue whether harem women were active in composing these stories or simply preserving them, but the oral tradition thrived behind closed walls. Sometimes you watch the Nile from high windows, the river sliding by like time itself. Boats drift, children play on the banks, farmers toil in the mud. Quirky tidbit again, some harems reportedly kept small menageries, gazelles, exotic birds, even monkeys, to amuse the secluded women. You imagine tossing fruit to a monkey and mutter joke too, at least one of us in this palace would get to climb trees. The monotony presses in. Without careful distraction, boredom turns into paranoia, amplifying every whisper and magnifying every glance. Mainstream fact once more, scholars believe seclusion in harems may have contributed to mental strain, though artistic depictions always show serene beauty. Historians still argue whether this serenity was real or simply propaganda for the outside world. At night, lying beneath linen sheets, you count cracks in the ceiling, waiting for sleep. Joke 3 drifts through your mind. Honestly, I thought palace life meant endless excitement, not endless embroidery. And so the days pass, luxury gilded with silence, boredom edged with danger. After days of sameness, the monotony breaks with sound, the drums, flutes, and chants of a festival rising from beyond the palace walls. Even from within the harem's confines, you can feel the city pulsing with celebration. The festivals are not for you exactly, but you're part of the display. Another ornament Pharaoh parades before gods and people alike. Mainstream fact, ancient Egyptian life revolved around festivals tied to religion, agriculture, and the Nile's flood. Processions of god statues, banquets, and performances filled the streets, while elites, including Pharaoh's household, were central to the spectacle. Historians still argue whether concubines appeared publicly in these events or remained hidden. But records suggest they sometimes joined as musicians or attendants. You're dressed early in dazzling linen dyed with rare pigments, your eyes ringed in thick kohl, lips stained with crushed carmine. Servants set lotus crowns upon your head, their petals cool against your skin. Quirky tidbit, Egyptians believed lotus flowers closed at night and reopened at dawn symbolized rebirth, so wearing one tied you directly to divine renewal. You glance in the polished mirror, joke 1 slipping out, perfect, I'm basically walking around as a floral metaphor. The procession begins. From behind gilded screens, you glimpse Pharaoh's barge gliding down the Nile, banners fluttering, trumpets blaring. The air is thick with incense and dust, the sound of thousands chanting prayers. Mainstream fact again, festivals like Opet in Thebes included river journeys of god statues, with Pharaoh himself leading rituals that reinforced his divine role. Historians still argue whether concubines' participation was symbolic or practical, but their presence displayed Pharaoh's wealth and vitality. Your role is modest, to stand, to smile faintly, to hold a lotus stalk or shake a sistrum in rhythm with chants. Yet the crowd roars when Pharaoh raises his hand, and you feel the sheer weight of collective devotion. Quirky tidbit again, some festivals gave out free beer and bread, turning solemn rituals into massive street parties. You watch enviously as commoners cheer with mugs in hand, muttering joke 2, honestly, they look like they're having way more fun than we are backstage. Hours pass in sun and song, your arms aching from holding symbolic objects. The celebration blurs into a haze of heat and chanting, yet you can't deny its power, the way it makes Pharaoh seem larger than life. And you just one glittering fragment of the image. Mainstream fact once more, these spectacles weren't just religious, they reinforced political unity, binding ruler and people through shared awe. Historians still argue whether the awe was genuine devotion or carefully staged theater, but standing there, you can feel both possibilities humming in the air. By evening, when the procession returns, you're exhausted, drenched in sweat and perfume, and more than ready to collapse. Joke 3 drifts out as you peel off your lotus crown, if this is what being divine looks like, the gods must nap for days afterward. The drums fade, and silence returns. But the memory of thousands chanting still vibrates in your chest. The echoes of festivals fade, but in the harem, whispers of influence grow louder. You start to notice that power doesn't just flow from Pharaoh down, it sometimes creeps upward from the shadows. Concubines may not sit on thrones, but their words can tip balances, steer affections, and even alter the line of succession. Mainstream fact: throughout Egyptian history, women in royal harems were involved in political intrigue, with some mothers of pharaohs wielding immense authority. The infamous harem conspiracy against Ramesses III proves the harem could be a center of dangerous plotting. Historians still argue whether most concubines truly held influence or if these were rare exceptions. But the potential was always there. You sit in the garden one evening, embroidery abandoned, as an older concubine leans close and warns you, never waste gossip. Aim it. Her eyes glitter, and you realize she isn't speaking about idle chatter, she's teaching strategy. Quirky tidbit: some surviving ostraca, pottery shards with writing, from Deir el-Medina show that even common households recorded gossip about palace intrigue. It seems everyone loved the drama. Joke 1 slips out quietly, perfect, even the neighborhood potters were ancient TMZ. The more you listen, the more you see it. A casual complaint here leads to a rival's sudden dismissal. A carefully placed compliment reaches Pharaoh through a servant's tongue. Influence in the harem is less about shouting and more about planting seeds. Mainstream fact again: in some reigns, concubines or secondary wives promoted their sons as heirs, leading to vicious rivalries with the great royal wife. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh was in control of these struggles or merely a pawn of competing factions. One night, a concubine boasts of receiving a villa near Memphis as a gift. Another sneers, whispering that she bribed a priest for favorable omens. By morning, servants carry trays to her chamber anyway. Quirky tidbit again: Egyptians often sought omens from dream interpreters, believing God spoke through sleep. You picture Pharaoh being told which concubine is lucky based on last night's bizarre dream and mutter Joke 2, honestly. I hope he never dreams of crocodiles, or we're all doomed. It becomes clear that while Pharaoh may hold the scepter, the harem hums with invisible strings tugging at his decisions. Mainstream fact once more: court politics were deeply entangled with family and household dynamics, and the harem was a central node in that web. Historians still argue whether this power was consistent across dynasties or spiked only during unstable reigns, but the potential for upheaval always lingered. Lying in bed that night, you stare at the ceiling, realizing the gilded cage has sharp teeth. Joke 3 slips from your lips: great, I thought I signed up for palace luxury, not an endless season of Survivor, Nile edition. Sleep is uneasy, because now you know, survival here isn't about beauty, it's about politics whispered in the dark. Time drifts differently in the harem. Days marked by lotus baths and honeyed bread melt into months, and eventually the mirror betrays you. The cold doesn't hide the lines forming at the corners of your eyes, and the perfumes can't quite disguise the way your youth slowly fades. You begin to notice what happens to those who no longer glow as brightly under Pharaoh's gaze. Mainstream fact: aging concubines often transitioned into different roles, sometimes as overseers of younger women, sometimes as caretakers of royal children, and in rare cases as respected priestesses. The harem wasn't only for youth, it was an institution with layers of responsibility. Historians still argue whether older concubines retained dignity or slid into obscurity. But survival often depended on adapting. One morning, you're handed not silks but a scroll of duties, watching over a cluster of children racing through the courtyard. They are Pharaoh's sons and daughters, small whirlwinds with shaved heads and protective amulets dangling around their necks. Quirky tidbit: royal children often wore a distinctive side lock of youth, a single braid of hair left long as a marker of childhood. You laugh as a boy's braid bounces while he runs, muttering Joke 1, great, even the kids have better hairstyles than me. Your chambers shift, too. They're less adorned, closer to the center of the harem, where supervision is needed. You're no longer competing for glances. Instead, you're quietly enforcing order, scolding a girl for stealing dates, guiding a boy through his lessons. Mainstream fact again, the harem served as a school for princes and princesses, with concubines and tutors playing key roles in their upbringing. Historians still argue whether this was a position of honor or merely a practical use of those no longer favored. In the evenings, you join the older women in hushed circles. They share remedies for aching joints, recall the days when Pharaoh's eyes lingered on them, and trade stories that blur truth and exaggeration. Quirky tidbit again, some harems employed scribes to record songs and lullabies, preserving voices that might otherwise have faded. You hum one softly, joke two bubbling out, at least now I'm finally allowed to sing without worrying about impressing anyone but toddlers. The rivalry eases, replaced by something gentler, resignation, perhaps, or wisdom. You still wear your amulets, still paint your eyes, but the urgency is gone. You realize that in some ways, age is its own kind of freedom. Mainstream fact once more, some retired concubines were granted estates or positions within temple service, ensuring they remained part of Egypt's social fabric. Historians still argue whether these rewards were common or rare privileges, but they prove that the harem was not always a dead end. As you lie in bed that night, children's laughter still echoing faintly in your ears, joke 3 slips out, honestly, babysitting royal brats might be the hardest job I've had in this palace. The torchlight flickers, and you smile. Your days of chasing Pharaoh's gaze may be over, but a quieter kind of survival has begun. By now, years have blurred into one another. You've shifted from nervous girl at the palace gates to polished ornament in silks, from cautious whisperer in the web of gossip to weary caretaker of princes and princesses. The harem no longer feels like a gilded trap but more like a closed world where stories linger longer than people. You begin to wonder how your life, and those of women like you, will be remembered once the limestone walls crumble and the Nile shifts its course. Mainstream fact, some concubines remain anonymous in the historical record, their names lost, while others appear in inscriptions, tombs, or court records, remembered as mothers of kings or figures in conspiracies. Historians still argue whether the absence of most concubines from official texts means they were irrelevant or whether their influence simply left quieter marks. One afternoon, you walk past workers carving Pharaoh's latest monument. Blocks of stone etched with scenes of his victories and offerings to the gods rise higher each day. Quirky tidbit, some of these walls also included faint graffiti left by workers, small sketches, jokes, or names, proving that even eternity had doodles in its margins. You smile, joke one slipping out, perfect. My whole life could vanish, but some bored stonemason's stick figure gets immortalized. Songs, too, carry memory. Musicians in the harem sometimes compose verses that praise Pharaoh's beauty or a concubine's grace. A melody you once sang in training resurfaces in a lullaby you hum for a royal child. Mainstream fact again, fragments of Egyptian love songs survive on papyri, filled with imagery of lotus blossoms, the Nile, and longing glances. Historians still argue whether these were personal expressions or formulaic exercises, but they echo with startling intimacy across millennia. When you're older, younger concubines glance at you with a mix of pity and respect. You offer them advice, when to smile, when to stay silent, which amulet to wear when Pharaoh's gaze feels heavy. In that advice, you realize, is your legacy, not carved in stone, but whispered from one woman to another. Quirky tidbit again, some burial goods of women believed to be concubines included mirrors, combs, and cosmetic jars, suggesting that their role as embodiments of beauty was preserved even in death. You turn a polished mirror in your hands, joke two slipping out, fantastic, when I die, I'll still be stuck reapplying eyeliner for eternity. The Nile flows on, indifferent, carrying silt. Fish, and forgotten songs to the sea. You lie on a cushion, thinking how quickly palaces fade, how even pharaohs eventually become mummies in dark tombs. Mainstream fact once more, modern archaeology uncovers traces of harems, palaces at Medinet Habu or Tel El Amarna, but much remains unknown, shrouded in silence. Historians still argue whether that silence hides insignificance or deliberate erasure, but it leaves space for imagination. As you close your eyes, Joke 3 drifts like a sigh. Honestly, if anyone remembers me, I hope it's for my sarcasm more than my embroidery. The world fades, but your story lingers, woven into stone, song, and memory. Now let the palace walls soften in your mind. The painted ceilings of stars fade gently, leaving only the real constellations twinkling above. The perfumes, the music, the whispers, they dissolve like incense smoke carried away on the night breeze. You step out into the gardens one last time, the lotus pools reflecting the moonlight. The air is cool, calm, and free of rivalry. You walk slowly along the stone paths, no longer hurried, no longer watched. Around you, the reeds sway softly, the Nile murmurs beyond the walls, steady and eternal. You pause at the edge of the pool. The lotus blossoms close for the night, their petals folding inward with a sigh. Their quiet rhythm matches your breath, opening with the sun, resting with the stars, always returning. You realize your life, too, has been one long cycle, of waiting, of learning, of surviving. As the sounds of the palace fade completely, the night deepens into stillness. The stars above are sharp and endless, steady in a way no intrigue or fleeting favor could ever be. You feel their calm trickle through you, loosening every knot of tension. Let yourself sink into that stillness now. Inhale slowly, filling your chest with cool, steady air. Exhale gently, letting your shoulders fall, your mind ease. Each breath softens you further, until you are no longer inside a palace, no longer weighed by gold or whispers. You are simply floating, safe. In the quiet, the gates close, the Nile flows on, and your story drifts into the eternal hush of the desert night. Sleep comes easily now, as natural as the lotus folding its petals at dusk.